Great Awakenings were periods of religious revival throughout American history, the first dating all the way back to the 1730s. On the other hand, the Great Awakenings refer to periods of intense left-wing ideological fervor surrounding identity politics, namely race, gender identity, sexuality, and to a lesser extent, disability, religious affiliation, and even being a fat ass. The first Great Awakening was the counterculture of the 1960s and early 70s, with the civil rights movement, second wave feminism, and the budding gay rights movement, and even the fat power movement. This movement passed the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Acts, along with other quite impressive legislative accomplishments throughout the Western world. This movement also produced increased focus on some of the uglier aspects of our shared history and society. The Second Awakening occurred from the 1990s to 1993. This movement was far less substantial and has largely been forgotten. It primarily existed on university campuses and was centered around language. It was this period of time in which the term political correctness, once used by communists and later feminists in a positive light, was co-opted by conservatives to mock what they saw as excessive language policing. For example, the word Oriental was once widely used as a neutral term, but then was replaced by the term Asian. The only people who still use the word Oriental in that context tend to be grandpas who think Mandarin Chinese sounds like Ching Chong Ling Long. The third Great Awakening would emerge during the early 2010s, and this is the one we are all familiar with. Like the previous wave, it started out on university campuses, namely in classes that were less about scholarship, but more about activism, such as women's studies, soon to be changed into gender studies, queer studies, black studies, post-colonial studies, and even fat studies. My personal favorite academic journal article from these prestigious faculties covers quote-unquote black anality. The central tenet of this ideology is centered around the belief that the world can be divided into an oppressor versus oppressed binary, oppressed groups versus oppressor groups. And it just so happens to be the case that the oppressor groups are seen as evil and the oppressed groups are righteous. In other words, white people bad, black people good, men bad, women good, cis people bad, trans good. In sharp contrast to the civil rights movement of the 1960s and the gay marriage equality movement of the early 2010s, the intersectional feminist movement of the early 2010s to the early 2020s was not so much interested in dismantling the role immutable characteristics played in people's lives in favor of individual characteristics or a common humanity. The third Great Awakening was more interested in reinforcing the role of identity groups. At the intersection of all of these identities is, well, intersectionality. This is the idea that all of these forms of oppression were intertwined into one matrix of oppression. A white woman is privileged by her whiteness, and therefore must be shamed. But she is also a woman, and therefore is oppressed. And therefore, to use that term way too often, is seen as virtuous. A black man is good because of his blackness, while being an evil male pig. A black woman, on the other hand, is a righteous being of enlightenment. Every time she shits, it smells like lavender and lemongrass. On the other end of the spectrum is the white male. I almost puked saying that. White men are viewed as evil incarnate, born with the worst of original sins. Just look how evil this white man looks. Wait, look closer. That's Satan incarnate. As stated before, these ideas came from university ivory towers before dominating online circles. They combine Marxist ideas of the oppressor versus the oppressed applied to race and gender rather than economic class. The ideas also have roots in French postmodernism, which fixates on subjective experiences rather than facts and logic. This is why many people in this movement use the phrase, "my truth." Many have noticed the parallels with the religion that the Great Awakening has with the Great Awakening, hence the adopted terminology. The word quote-unquote woke comes from African American vernacular English, and was once used by the people within the movement, signifying a heightened sense of awareness. That awareness being about injustice and bigotry. The term woke, as it was originally used, implies that the person in question was once lost, but after adopting the ideology of intersectional feminism, now understands the totality of how the world operates. This makes the ideology rather similar to the Christian concept of being born again. Once you were in the dark, and now you are in the light. Privilege is also similar to the Christian concept of the original sin. Intersectionality is also similar to Hinduism's caste system, whereby people are perceived as being good or bad by the group they were born into. Granted, in practice, this isn't as extreme with intersectionality. I have yet to see white guys being forced to work cleaning up cow dung as untouchables. Speaking of religion, the first online IRL movement to face the wrath of the Great Awakening was the aforementioned New Atheist movement. As previously mentioned, Atheism Plus tore the movement apart, with the IRL faction being pro-identity politics and the online faction being anti-identity politics. This would tear the movement apart, ending the New Atheist movement as a potent force, as the self-proclaimed social justice movement moved on to other targets. The microblog website Tumblr would become the nexus of online activity related to social justice, proclaiming themselves to be social justice warriors, a term that predates the widespread use of the word woke, but like the word woke, started out as a term of endearment for people within the movement, only to turn into a term of derision and mockery by those outside of the movement. This Tumblr community was made up of predominantly middle-class and upper-middle-class teenage girls and young women. These women would list their identities, both immutable and non-immutable, in their Tumblr bios. Tumblr is where online quote-unquote wokeness, for lack of a better term, would begin. Posts were shared about racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, Islamophobia, fatphobia, and other isms and phobias in instances both real and imaginary. Countless controversies and controversies over what celebrity was problematic emerged as a legion of teenage girls going through their 6th or 7th menstrual cycle had brought their own digital pitchforks to lance anybody who didn't bow down to the new orthodoxy. Young privileged women would become the primary demographic behind this trend, and we'll get to that in later chapters. However, Tumblr's limelight would not last. The search engine Yahoo had a hard time competing with Google and even Bing. In order to look cool and popular with them youngins, Yahoo bought Tumblr. However, Yahoo had to be a lame parent and would eventually ban corn on the microblogging site. And I'm not talking about the type of corn that is edible and starts with a C. Without enough gooning material on the website, there was a mass exodus of Tumblr users, including many of the activists. Many of these refugees would come onto Twitter. The feminism of academia and online microblogs started to seep, or in the eyes of some, metastasize into major cultural institutions. Many celebrities jumped on the pop feminism bandwagon, most notably Emma Watson, who spoke at the UN claiming that feminism was about equality, not man-hating. Now, I personally believe that Emma Watson had the best of intentions, but it was just hard to take some of this seriously when it was juxtaposed to Tumblr, Twitter, and other terminally online feminists who are quite fond of hating men. The rampant vilification of young men in these online circles specifically, along with the collapse of the New Atheist movement, which was quite popular with young men, led to the beginnings of an ideological gender divide online and in the voting booths, as young women embraced more left-wing politics as young men reacted by turning towards the right, or at the very least the center. Even when young men did lean left, they were oftentimes castigated by mainstream institutions anyway. The most notable example of this was the issue of Bernie Bros, in which the centrist candidate Hillary Clinton and her mostly female supporters in the online press accused social democrat Bernie Sanders and his supporters of being sexist primarily online. Bernie Bros were an alleged group of online misogynist trolls, and their evidence for this sexism is that they did not find Hillary Clinton's unofficial campaign slogan of "I have a vagina, vote for me" compelling. Speaking of many of these outlets, the online versions of print media emerged as a major force during the early 2010s, as well as purely online publications. Do we even call them online publications if they were never printed? I need to look that up. Anyway, you had major websites like Gawker, Vice, BuzzFeed, Jezebel, The Mary Sue, and other countless publications who push progressive views on race, gender, and sexuality. This online fervor would enter the real world in 2014 under the Ferguson protests, or Ferguson riots depending on who you talk to. These peaceful protests and riots, and yes, there were both, emerged after a black man by the name of Michael Brown was killed by a police officer under circumstances which are still hotly debated to this day. This would spur the beginnings of the Black Lives Matter movement, which would ridicule what they saw as systematic police brutality, debtors' prisons, and systematic racism. The movement was just as active on the streets as they were on Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, and online news publications. On the gender front, a woman by the name of Anita Sarkeesian would set up a series of videos critiquing what she saw as sexism in video games. The gamer audience, which at that point was overwhelmingly male and for the most part apolitical, created a massive backlash online. Sarkeesian was widely ridiculed by YouTubers, many of whom were members of the now defunct New Atheist movement, such as Thunderfoot, The Amazing Atheist, and the newcomer by the online name of Sargon of Akkad, also known as Carl Benjamin. At the time, Sarkeesian received overwhelming support from mainstream online media. On websites such as Gawker, Jezebel, The Daily Beast, The Guardian, and others, which at this point had fully adopted the progressive identity politics of academia. This came along with a controversy around the game developer Zoe Quinn, who some claim to have slept with game reviewers for positive reviews of her upcoming indie game. Were the accusations true or false? I don't know, nor do I care. What I do know is that this controversy, along with Anita Sarkeesian, sparked Gamergate, which in the eyes of its supporters was a righteous rallying cry against corruption in video games journalism, and in the eyes of others, particularly journalists themselves, was a misogynistic harassment campaign. These online ideological turf wars would seep into the real world when Sargon of Akkad and a group of other anti-SJWs attended a panel at VidCon with Anita Sarkeesian. They sat at the front, and Anita responded by calling Sargon a quote-unquote garbage human. The co-founder of VidCon, Hank Green of the Vlogbrothers, came to Sarkeesian's defense. Regardless of your own stance, what is inarguable is that the anti-feminist faction would dominate online circles for a while the pro-feminist side would dominate the mainstream media and cultural institutions for a while. Corporations and big tech were influenced by the Great Awakening as well. Ellen Pao, an investor and then CEO of Reddit from 2014 to 2015, would be pressured to resign after what some would call the Reddit revolt of 2015. I personally find the term Reddit revolt to be quite amusing. With the internet, this was the first time in human history when you can have a quote-unquote revolt by a group of people who usually look like this. The banned subreddits included the anti-fat subreddits of r/fatpeoplehate, that one's fairly straightforward, and the more creative r/hamplanet-hatred. Hating fat people while being on Reddit is like a racist moving to Nigeria. And speaking of racism, another subreddit that was banned was r/shit insert racial slur say. I will let you guess what racial slur it is. Hint, it starts with an N and ends with a hard R. The other two bans were more compassionate communities of r/transfigs and r/neofig, and I'm not talking about God's favorite fruit. The revolt started after Pao announced that the 5 subreddits would be banned for promoting online and offline harassment, another case of the line between online and offline worlds getting blurred. Speaking of mainstream institutions, many politicians also noticed the power of identity politics. The Democrats in the United States started to court this voting bloc, which was fairly small in population, but at the same time wielded a disproportionate amount of power in cultural institutions, as many of them were professional women who had recently graduated from universities, adopting the ideology of what SES Wesley Yang would call the successor ideology. In Canada, Justin Trudeau would become Prime Minister, under the platform of focusing on political correctness and identity politics, particularly related to sensitivity around issues related to women and Indigenous people.
Eternal love is the love that's going to change the future of mankind. So we'd like you to...
We like to say people kind, not necessarily mankind.
Yeah.
It's more inclusive.
There we go, exactly. Yes, thank you.
We can all...
But not Arabs for some reason. I can't imagine why. Before I get into the backlash, I'd like to coin my own term called the counterfeit counterculture, of which this movement exemplifies. The counterfeit counterculture masquerades as being against the mainstream society. In this case, painting mainstream society as racist, sexist, and transphobic, needing to be drastically reformed or even destroyed to build something new in its place. While at the same time this movement became the dominant culture. To be clear, it didn't become the dominant culture by being the most popular or common set of opinions with the general public, IRL or offline, but it did become the dominant culture of those in positions of power in cultural institutions, namely academia, news media, marketing departments, HR departments, schooling, social work, and the entertainment industry. Oh yeah, and social media. Next up, the anti-SJW movement, when Neckbeards and Legbeards collide. The Great Awakening didn't occur unchallenged, for a budding group of edgelords with animal avatars came out en masse to fight the hordes of polychromatic-haired college girls. Yeah, for some reason, a lot of the critics of the budding social justice movement had cartoon avatars, usually of some sort of animal. So for the sake of this chapter, you can call me the sardonic anti-SJW seahorse. Young men by and large like irreverent, edgy humor, and the mid-2010s exemplified this, with online comedians like Filthy Frank, Ethan Klein, and iDubbbz. Some like Filthy Frank were apolitical, while others, like Ethan Klein, dabbled in the mockery of BuzzFeed feminists, while smearing his face in ranch dressing. iDubbbz would go viral for using two slurs within the same phrase. His greatest accomplishment to this day. We'll get back to him soon. Meanwhile, many in the now defunct New Atheist movement, such as the Amazing Atheist and Thunderfoot, were creating content bashing not the old right-wing male evangelicals trying to stop you from looking at big tits in video games, but rather the young left-wing atheist female feminists trying to stop you from looking at big tits in video games. Meanwhile, on the other side of the gender divide, issues related to feminism, race, and sexual orientation became trendy among the target audience of young women that many of these online news publications were catering to. BuzzFeed would set up a YouTube channel which would upload cringe-inducing videos peddling intersectional belief systems for many neckbeards and animal avatars to occasionally pause and laugh at. This was the era of countless viral videos of quote-unquote social justice warriors getting destroyed. Some of the most notable examples included Big Red and some woman that went into a meltdown over a lame dad joke.
That's what it is. Humongous what? Is that sexual harassment?
No, it's humongous.
Then why did you say that to me?
That's my name.
What? Humongous what?
Humongous what?
Humongous what? Is that sexual harassment? Is that what you just did when you said that to me?
What, humongous?
Why would you say that to me?
Yes, but my name.
Why would you say that to me?
Why would I say it to
Why
you?
would you say that to me?
Why would you ask me my name?
What? Humongous what? Humongous what?
No, they said that they already made one.
Humongous what? Humongous what? This person just spoke to me in a sexually harassing.
This came along with various university campus meltdowns. Universities, once hailed as beacons of critical thinking and enlightenment, were oftentimes presented online as cesspools of groupthink, where a young woman's brains turned into protein paste. Spontaneous clips of these campus meltdowns would turn numerous campus activists into unintentional online micro-celebrity laughingstocks, such as the aforementioned feminist Big Red at the University of Toronto,
I'm reading
to Trigglypuff at the University of Massachusetts. In nearly all of these viral clips, the characters involved acted and looked exactly as you expected them to. Needless to say, many of them could benefit from regular meditation and a diet. The former centrist New Atheists were shafted within the movement, as right-wing religious ideologues started to quote-unquote trigger campus activists with septum piercings. Even some boomers took part in this, such as Dennis Prager, who had set up the YouTube channel Prager University to tell all you youngins how anthropogenic climate change is just a conspiracy to stop you good old red-blooded Americans from barbecuing with charcoal, along with eating some grilled bugs and vegan aioli. To my knowledge, Prager University is not an accredited university. This was also the epoch of Milo Yiannopoulos, a supposedly gay, supposedly Catholic, supposedly conservative, supposedly journalist, supposedly man, who would tour various campuses baiting far-left activists for clout and money, one fabulous meltdown at a time. That was until he got outed singing the praises of, let's just call it, R. Kelly-like behavior by Catholic priests on the Drunken Peasants podcast, a podcast that at the time was hosted by the aforementioned Amazing Atheist. Meanwhile, gay comedian Dave Rubin, and yes, I'm using the term comedian loosely.
No, you're cold. You're just a cold. You're cold. You know that the gays are cold. That they fear the cold. The gays love water, but fear the cold. Exciting.
Would leave his job at the progressive networks The Young Turks, claiming that he was not fond of Cenk Uyghur's performance in his debate with Sam Harris over the issue of Islam, viewing Cenk Uyghur as too sympathetic to Islamic extremism. Cenk and other progressives would be labeled with the term regressive left by the anti-SJWs. The term progressive left was coined by Majid Nawaz to refer to progressives who constantly accuse everyone of being sexist, racist, and homophobic, so long as that person doesn't have a bushy beard with no mustache and follows a 7th century Arabian prophet who called Ethiopians raisin heads. One of the flashpoints of the budding anti-SJW movement happened in 2016 on the campus of University of Toronto. A professor of Jungian and clinical psychology by the name of Jordan B. Peterson was rallying against what he saw as an assault on freedom of speech by the provincial government of Ontario, fueled by trans activists. It was a surreal experience for myself, having attended countless lectures in that very same building. Jordan Peterson would become one of the most prominent voices against the woke movement, and soon would become one of the most loved and simultaneously hated public figures, combining Jungian and clinical psychology with Christian metaphysics and ethics alongside conservative culture war animosity towards wokeism. His book, 12 Rules for Life, would become a massive Amazon bestseller, particularly with young men, and his conferences would sell out with massive audiences devoted to him. But at the same time, he would also elicit a tremendous amount of disdain from the cultural left, IRL, and online. He was part of a wider movement, what would later be known as the intellectual dark web, a term coined by financial executive Eric Weinstein. The group included his brother, biologist Brett Weinstein, who came to fame through the power of being yelled at by gender-ambiguous college students, and would move on to become a prominent opponent of the COVID vaccines. The group also hosted former Young Turks co-host Dave Rubin, who I mentioned before, as well as former New Atheist Sam Harris. The most famous member of the group was, of course, the biggest podcaster in the world, Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan started out as a martial artist, then he played the electrician on the sitcom News Radio, and then hosted the show Fear Factor. What makes Joe Rogan's career so unique is that he has been one of the few people to massively transition away from old media into new media and find a greater amount of fame there, being particularly popular with young men. During the 2000s, it would have been unthinkable to have sitcoms and reality TV shows produced by major studios getting eclipsed by a podcast hosted by some bald guy blowing bong smoke while talking to MMA fighters, comedians, and professors about chimps and DMT. Joe Rogan didn't really fit into any clear ideological group, having endorsed both Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump throughout the course of his podcasting career, but the mainstream media would eventually see him as a right-wing adjacent figure. Regardless of all of this, his podcasts and clip channels would rack up amazing view counts for content that oftentimes were genuinely insightful, but oftentimes also included stuff like this.
Show me a real picture. Show me a real picture.
Listen, NASA does not have one of those satellites.
Fake.
Why do you think that's fake?
That's fake as fuck.
Why does it look fake
It looks
as fuck?
it looks like something you'd see in a movie.
That's because when they do it in a movie, they try to make it look like this, which is what looks real.
If that's real to you, man,
You don't think it's real?
they faked 6
Eddie,
moon
Eddie, dude,
landings.
stop saying that because it's irrelevant. Why would it be fake?
Propaganda, man.
Eddie sparked the fiery debate with the brazen declaration that photos of a round Earth are all fake.
Speaking of YouTube, the anti-SJW movement began to fracture, just like the new atheist movement which spurred it. The anti-SJW movement was based off of a negative identity, like the new atheist movement. Anti-identities are just not very sustainable in the long run, though. And for that reason, it is time to say goodbye to the sardonic anti-SJW seahorse. We will come back to this subject later when we discuss the anti-woke movement that would emerge during 2021. After all, male seahorses, like trans men, are birthing persons.